Great, thank you so much. So hi everybody, my name's Becky and I am a student recruitment officer here at the University of Surrey, and I'm going to be kicking off today's session. So we've got a lot to cover over the next hour and 15 minutes. So first of all, we're going to look at choosing a course in university and also personal statements. And you can see our email addresses down at the bottom. We can share these with you at the end of the presentation as well if you wanted to get in touch with us directly. But what we're going to cover today, we'll look at choosing a course, and then we'll look at choosing a university, because the things involved with these can be very, very different. We're also going to look at choosing a student life as a sort of thing that a lot of people don't really consider when they are choosing where to go to university. And then we're going to go on to the personal statement. So first of all, we'll look at what is a personal statement and how does it fit into that Ucas application. We'll look at the personal statement format, and finally we'll finish with some personal statement top tips for writing the best personal statement that you can, and then we'll finish with a Q&A where we will welcome you to ask any questions that you may have. So first of all, I'm going to take you through choosing a course at university. So myself and my colleagues at Warwick and Southampton will all agree with me that we do recommend that students decide on a course or a subject area they want to study first, and then choose the university where they want to study that particular subject area later. When you make an application on Ucas, you have up to 5 different choices, and there are 50,000 different courses that you can choose from on Ucas at this present moment in time. Now, you may be a science student and you might think to yourself, well, a lot of those 50,000 courses are not going to be relevant to me because I want to do science, and the English literature courses, the history courses, etc., they won't be relevant to me. However, if you are a student wanting to study a science-based course, so maybe a kind of chemistry or biology, physics, or even an engineering science, there are over 1,000 of those courses to choose from on Ucas currently. So there's over 1,000 of those courses offered in the UK at the present moment. So it's really important that you do your research into what you actually want to get out of a course at university. Now, a really good example of this is something like psychology. Now, lots of students want to study psychology, but psychology as a subject is a huge subject. The amount of different pathways that you can take under psychology is huge. There's infinity. There's so many different areas you can go into. So if you're a student who's thinking, well, I like psychology and I'm really interested in developmental psychology, when you're doing your research into university courses, make sure that the courses you're looking at actually offer you the required percentage of developmental psychology that you're after. On the other hand, you may be more interested in clinical psychology. You might be more interested in environmental psychology, social psychology. You might be more interested in health psychology, sports psychology. So really having that sort of chat with yourself and working out what you're interested in studying and what you need to have in a course is so important, because that will really inform your choices when you're looking through the huge opportunities and huge variety of courses on offer currently in the UK. Now, just a few things to think about. Obviously, think about your interests and your career goals. Now, I highly recommend that you choose a course subject area that you're actually interested in and that you enjoy, because you're more likely to do very well in that. Also, with career goals, if you know now that you want to work for British Airways or Emirates Airlines working on aeroplanes, then working backwards from that, you would probably be needing to do a degree in something like aerospace engineering or mechanical engineering. So thinking about the future and then working back as to what degree you might have to do to get there is really important. Another really basic example of this is if you want to be a vet, then you'll need to do a degree in veterinary medicine. So thinking about it like that. There's also the entry requirements to think about as well. So all university courses in the UK will require you to get a certain level of qualification in your final year certificates at school. So do bear that in mind, and this will vary and differ from university to university. You may find a business degree that is asking if you're doing A-levels for AAB in your A-levels, and another one that will be asking for BBB. Or if you're doing the International Baccalaureate, they'll ask you for 34 overall. and another course might ask you for 30. So think about what you're likely to achieve in your final exams, and then use that as a tool to help you narrow down some course subject areas that you're interested in. Also, academic support available. This might be something that is important to some of you, but not to others. So, you know, how can that university, how can that course support you throughout your studies? There's also professional recognition. So lots of courses in the UK will carry a professional recognition, which is a seal of approval from an external company that this course is, you know, top quality. So, for example, our psychology programme here at Surrey is BPS accredited, which means it's accredited by the British Psychological Society, which will then help with employability once you have graduated. Other courses where professional recognition might come in handy is things like engineering programs or accounting and finance programs. Having that recognition can really support with employability and careers once you have graduated. Obviously, thinking about that course content and assessment, and I've already touched upon that. You know, make sure the course is what you want it to be. It would be disastrous if you turned up at day one of university and the course wasn't what you wanted it to be because you hadn't done your research at this point in time. Also thinking about the assessment as well. So if you're like me, then you'll hate exams, and lots of universities publish on their websites about how they assess their courses. So if you're much more coursework focused and working on practical projects, that might help you narrow down your course options. Also, universities offer foundation years and integrated master's years as well. So if you're thinking that you might like to do a foundation year to really sort of, you know, get involved in a specific subject that you might not have actually previously worked on before, then those are options for you as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about personalising your degree, because this is something we do extremely well here in the UK. You're able to really focus your study on day one of your degree programme. Now, when you go onto university web pages and have a look at course content, you should be able to see the different modules that are available for that specific course. And as you'll see, this is a snapshot of the University of Surrey's website, but you'll find that some of your modules are compulsory, or what we call core modules, and these are modules you will have to do. But lots of universities give students the opportunity to really be flexible with what they learn and help them to be able to pick different optional modules. So you may be doing something like international business, but be much more interested in management science than you are in accounting and finance. So you'll be able to pick those optional modules as you go through your degree. So keep an eye out for that when you're doing your research. There's a few other optional modules that students can partake in as well. Some degree programmes will ask you to do a dissertation at the end of your degree, which is normally a 10 to 15,000 word essay, but some universities may assist you with a practical project. So looking at the course and seeing how you're assessed is really key if that's something that is, you know, important to you. So when you're researching a course, I would recommend going on to ucas.com first and type in a subject area that you're interested in and see what courses come up in that specific area. Once you've got a short list or a long list of different courses that you think look really interesting, it's important you go onto the university's websites and have a look at those courses in a lot more detail. Do make sure you're on the right course page. And when I say this, it's the year of entry. So if you're looking to come in 2022, make sure you're looking at the course page for 2022 entry. The reason I say this is at some points in the year, universities may have their 2021 entry and also their 2022 entry course pages on for students who might be going through clearing in the year above you. So do just bear in mind that you're looking at the right page for the year of entry you want to go on to. And a few other things you may want to consider when you're researching your course is how will you be taught? How many contact hours will you have? Module content I've already touched upon there. You may be interested in partaking in research activities and extracurricular activities as part of your programme as well. So does the university offer you the opportunity to be able to do that? Methods of assessment I've already mentioned there as well. So when it comes to contact hours, this is just to give you an overview of what contact hours at UK universities can look like. Now, on the left-hand side is a typical high school timetable, and you can see it's quite packed. I mean, this student has Friday afternoons off, but pretty much every other sort of, school time hours is filled up with classes. Whereas on the right-hand side, you can see here a timetable of a second-year English literature student here at the University of Surrey. And you can see that they have not many contact hours at all. This is because at university in the UK, we do put a lot of emphasis on independent study. So it's important for you, A, to realise that if you are applying to come to the UK, but B, also maybe to use this as one of your kind of points that you want to look at when you are doing your research. If you're somebody who thrives on independent study, then great, this timetable on the right hand side might look perfect for you. However, you may find that actually you want to have more contact hours a week, so that might help you make a decision as to which course is perfect for you. Just going to talk a little bit about professional training as well. All of our universities who are with you today, so Surrey, Warwick and Southampton, we all give the opportunity for students to be able to undertake a professional training year on the courses that you may want to do. At Surrey, this is a year-long placement and it is subject specific, and it's a really great opportunity for students to really get that industry experience. Now at Surrey, we have over 2,300 placement partners across the world that we work with on a year-on-year basis. However, on the left-hand side is just some of the ones that you probably recognise the most. I guess the biggest companies that we work with currently. I highly recommend a placement year or a placement 6 months, because it's a really great opportunity for you to be able to develop your skills. If working in industry and getting work experience as part of your degree programme is something that sounds interesting to you, when you do your course research, just make sure you're looking at courses that give you this option, and that might help you narrow down your search even further. Study abroad as well. So lots of universities offer the opportunity for students to be able to include a study abroad as part of their course. At Surrey, study abroad is part of the second year, and it's the opportunity for students to be able to study a semester or two of their course at a different university somewhere else in the world. So if travelling to a different part of the world as part of your degree programme is something that sounds interesting to you, then again, when you're doing your course research, see if study abroad is an option for that specific course, and if it is, where can you go in the world? And also learning a language as well. Now, lots of universities offer the opportunity for students to be able to learn a language for free alongside their degree programme. At Surrey, we offer the Global Graduate Award, or the GGA Award, and this is and the subjects we currently have on offer you can see on screen here. And this is an opportunity, as I said, for you to learn a language for free alongside your degree programme. Some universities, however, though, might offer the opportunity for you to learn a language as actually part of your degree programme. So you might be doing business management and you might be able to pick a module in Spanish rather than having an extra qualification and extra hours like the Global Graduate Award there. So there's lots of things to consider when picking a course. And once you've done that, you should then hopefully have a list of, I don't know, 8-10 different courses that you think look really, really interesting. But as I said, on the Ucas application form, you have 5 options, so you can apply to up to 5 different courses. So this is where Stephen's next section that I'm going to hand over to him might help you narrow that down even further by looking at the university that you want to study at. So Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Becky. So you will see here that you've got lots to consider. This is something that hopefully you will now have several months to dwell on. And in this section, I'm going to look through a bit more at some of the other wider considerations about not just what you're studying, but quite importantly, where you'll be living, the type of environment you'll be inhabiting and taking part in. So if we move on to the next slide. This is going to take you way back in time. So this is ancient history for you. This was my life back in the 1990s when I was choosing UK universities. And the book you see there, I found in my dad's garage recently. You can see it's got coffee rings on it from where he's probably been doing some work and put his mug down. And I rescued it because it took me back to the decision I took to study at Warwick. And the little table you see there is the page that I looked at, and I thought, oh look, there's some good universities there. Which ones are good for history, which was my subject? So as Becky has just said, you know, the thing to do is to look first at your subject, and then this is really step 2, where you're considering the wider context of study. You know, you might be looking at the modules you'll take, how modern was the focus on history, which was important to me. That was the next thing I looked at. I'm more of a modernist than an ancient historian. But then there's lots more to consider. Now, back in the 90s, we didn't have lots of league tables. There were 1 or 2. It was a book that you bought. Whereas now at your disposal, you've got lots of websites. You've got, you know, rankings forever being produced, some potentially more helpful than others. So if we just click through, this is the question really. So while I used this to help my decision making way back when, for yourself, think about what it measures. Looking at that in a bit more detail, we can give you some examples here of some rankings. So this is a comparison between 2 of these rankings, the one that I looked at, which was the Times, but then also a global ranking. And you will notice, the only point I want to make on this slide is just that they measure different things. So if you're looking at wider reputation, QS is a great place to look because it looks at employer perceptions of your university. It looks at academic reputation, which could be important if you're looking to become an academic and work in the research field. The Times measures other sort of metrics, so you've got student satisfaction to some extent, not so much, but things like teaching excellence, how hard it is to get into the university, so that's admissions tariff, and lots of other things. So look at a few different sources as you would with your essays and your assignments at the moment. Research widely and make certain that your university that you choose has all of the attributes that you want it to have. Moving it forward a step, these are some of those other league tables that have proliferated in the last few years. In our sector, we have a whole set of weird and wacky league tables that get sent round in December each year to us. These are some of them. So if you like wildlife, then, you know, duck density might be important. Warwick is a top 5 university for the number of wildfowl you'll find on campus. Perhaps more concretely, if you're looking at things like purchasing power, you know, how cheap it is to live in a city, then both Southampton and Warwick, we're in Coventry, make this list. Surrey won't be there because it's not a city, so they are exempted from that. But you see all these different sorts of measures. You can see that Surrey is the #1 safe university in the Times list. There are lots of different things that you might want to consider and your parents might want to consider when you're making your shortlist. Moving on a step, we then have university facilities, and we've looked at some of the academic aspects of your study. So if you do want to learn one of those languages, if you really want to learn Korean or Mandarin or Russian or British Sign Language, check what the language centres are like and the language facilities. But quite often it's worth looking in parallel. So taking that as an example, don't just look at the academic modules and facilities. Also have a look at what student-led societies are doing. Look at the sorts of trips they're organising, if they have language cafes, these sorts of things. Because actually there might be lots of things going on that are actually student-led and not necessarily on the academic side. For some of you, you might be looking at laboratories for science subjects, or in the arts, things like film projection. You know, these are other attributes you can measure and can look at. Many of our universities will have similar facilities, so you will see a checklist of things that will be relatively similar, like students' unions, sports facilities. But if you are a particular athlete at a sport, or if you have a really key hobby, or indeed volunteering that you want to do, for example, again, you can check student union lists and the sort of staffing that there is at that university to support you. Moving on to the next slide, we then have support services. We've just recorded a video between us, so I won't dwell on this, and we'll be circulating that to your school later this week if you did want to watch that. The main thing here is that there is lots of support out there, both academic and non-academic, and this can sit in lots of different places. So things like chaplaincies, your students' union again, as well as your academic personal tutoring. On the next slide, we then have careers, and this is important, of course, longer term. Don't worry if you don't know what you want to do yet. You know, if you are a psychologist that knows that they want to work in that field, or if you're an engineer that wants to work in aerospace engineering, absolutely check this out and look at the particular links that your university has. If, like many of my counterparts in history, you just love the subject, that's okay too. But it's still worth looking at, you know, employer reputation, as we've seen with that QS ranking, looking at the sorts of one-to-one support, the variety of sector events that the university you're looking at offers, and just get that broader view on how important and how much support you're going to find for careers development at your universities. Also consider volunteering, because that's another great way of getting experience. Next slide, please, Becky. Then there's accommodation. Now this year it's going to be a bit more challenging potentially for you, for those of you who are going to come and look at accommodation. We don't know yet what's going to be open, but because many things are online, universities have been developing online open days, fly-through videos, student-led sessions to give you a sense of accommodation options. There is a lot you can do just online. So in terms of researching where you'll be living, if this is a particularly important thing to you, do take advantage of YouTube videos, blogs, all of those open days that may be online. And if you are coming to the UK, if you're able to come to the UK later in the year or nearer the time, it's another great way of just actually seeing it for yourself. For ourselves, it's normally at open days that we make accommodation available for you to view. But one way or another, we will do that for you. Okay, next slide. And this takes us to Steph. So we're going to look a bit more at student life now.
Fabulous. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Becky. I think what you've kind of covered is really the kind of the bread and butter of choosing a course at a university in the UK. I think one of the things that I'm going to kind of wrap up this section with is just choosing a student life, to be honest, because although your university that you choose and your course that you choose will really shape the kind of experience that you have, I think there's some other kind of considerations that you might, as students from, you know, not from the UK, some other things that you might want to have a little look at. So on the next slide, it's just kind of explaining that going to university, it's not just about your course, as kind of Stephen has said, but actually it's where you're going to be spending the next 3, 4, potentially 5, potentially 6 years of your life. You know, we'd love to see you over here for sort of 6 years integrated masters courses and everything. That would be wonderful. We'd really love that. But it really is a large kind of chunk of your time. And also university is much more of a kind of transformational process for you as individuals, as students. So it's really important that you're kind of picking the student life that's really reflective of you as a student currently, or potentially who you kind of envisage yourself being once you embark on a university career, and then a career in the future as well. So I've just got some pictures on the next slide as well that might kind of help you sort of, you know, consider. So it's really a case of, if you can't decide quite yet what your course is and you can't quite decide on what kind of university you might want to go to, where do you kind of see yourself living? Do you see yourself living in kind of a bigger city with lots and lots of kind of high rises, really famous places, obviously like London, smaller cities or smaller kind of towns, and you know, Surrey, for example, is county, and Guildford is it a town, or is Guildford a city? What does Guildford count as, Becky?
It's an odd one. It's up for debate. It is a town, but it has a cathedral, so therefore it should have city status, but it doesn't, and I don't know why.
Okay, I'm going to leave that as you, because you're the expert on that one. And like Stephen said, Coventry is kind of like a mid-sized city where Warwick is based, and Southampton is a mid-sized city. But you've got kind of smaller places, smaller towns where universities are. You've got kind of other examples on here. Do you want to live somewhere that's close to the coast? I just use that example because at Southampton we are a port university, or not a port, we're a port city, and we're a university that's really, really close to the sea, which is lovely. Do you want to go to a city where there's lots and lots of kind of sporting events? It's really famous for sport. I know places like Liverpool, for example. Some people are massive Liverpool fans, and that is the only place that they can possibly see themselves going to university, which is absolutely fine. Do you want to live somewhere that's quite remote, so relatively in the middle of nowhere, more of a kind of agricultural feel? It really is a personal choice. It's up to you. Some people kind of might be thinking, oh no, that is absolutely not for me, I must live in a big city, and other people might not. So it really is completely individual. What I'm going to do then is really kind of give you some sort of points for thought really on the next couple of slides. So this next slide, there are really brilliant things, and there are massive positives towards living where you're potentially going to live. Definitely have a think about these things. I have just kind of mentioned a couple, but if you do potentially decide that a big city is for you, there are massive positives. So there's lots and lots of things to do. Now, when you're choosing your student life and your student experience, that's not just limited to the university that you pick. In the local area, so if you're in a big city, London, for example, you have unlimited sources of entertainment, you have unlimited sources of, tourist attractions, and things you can go, places to go and eat. You could pick probably a new place to go and eat every night for months and months and months, and you'd never run out. There's lots of things to do. There's also something to consider as well. So part-time job opportunities. If you do go to somewhere like a bigger city, you might find that if part-time work is something that's really essential to you and your student journey and funding yourself, then you might find there's more opportunities and more flexibility available in a bigger city. And also famous landmarks. Who doesn't want to be part of somewhere where they can go and take lots of pictures and send them home? I think that's really nice as well. That's a massive benefit from a big city. It's popular, people know, people have heard about it. Now, there are obviously massive benefits to smaller cities. So in terms of costing, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but generally slightly more affordable accommodation if you're living somewhere, off the beaten track. Obviously, London, I do, mainly say in terms of accommodation, it can get quite pricey. But then university accommodation might be a little bit more reasonable. So these are all things to do in your research. In a smaller city, you might find it's cheaper nights out and cheaper entertainment. You might find that if you're a person that maybe gets distracted by kind of bigger things a little bit more easily, you might find that actually a smaller city where you can kind of explore it and then you've done it, that will help you kind of focus on your university studies. You might find that it's slightly easier to get to classes as well. So if you choose maybe a campus university that's quite kind of not remote, because no university is going to be completely remote, but a smaller university with kind of, I use my university, for example, I would get out of bed. I could see my lecture theatres from my halls of residence window. So I would get out of bed, walk a few paces over to my lecture theatre, and then I would pop back to my room, and then the library was just across the road. I mean, minutes we're talking for walking. So you might find that a smaller city has that benefit for you. And also the campus university experience. So as I've just mentioned, that can be a selling point for some students if you want that kind of all enclosed campus feel, which is great. And obviously with positives come sort of downsides and drawbacks. I wouldn't say downsides or negatives, because these in some eyes might not be negatives, might not be drawbacks, but they're just other considerations. Obviously, in a bigger city, you might find accommodations a bit more expensive. There is a little bit of a longer commute to class, so it's kind of getting on a bus and going to university as opposed to just popping across to your buildings. No campus experience, so you might actually find that you're kind of missing that university feel, in a sense of going to X number of buildings and you're all encapsulated in one area. You might also find in a big city that there's limited sort of sports facilities, so the ability to have lots and lots of playing fields and open spaces and things like that might be a little bit less available for you in a bigger city, and then lots of distractions. So whereas these are kind of benefits for the smaller city, you might find that they're less of a benefit in the biggers. And the small city, they're just as well. Again, no right or wrong here, but some people might say smaller cities are a bit boring. There's not much to do. You might have to travel a little bit further to go and do the activities that you're interested in. There might be fewer job opportunities, although I will say being employed by your university, so working for your uni, is a really good idea if you are looking for part-time work, just because of the flexibility aspect. And I know that Warwick and Surrey also have fantastic student employment availabilities as well, so that's brilliant. But you might find it more in general if you wanted to go and work for like a large supermarket, or you already, were considering a job in retail. You might find that there were fewer of those available in the smaller cities. Fewer accommodation options. So somewhere like a big city, like a Manchester, for example, you might have 6 or 7 different types of private accommodation available. In a smaller city, you might not get that. You might kind of feel that you have to go with that, but often they'll be really good value anyway, because they've got to be for students who want to support you. And rubbish for Instagram. The only reason I put that on there is because you just might find that if you're the kind of person that you really love to share, love to kind of go and explore and take lots of pictures and kind of send them to lots of different people, a smaller city might not be might not be for you then. So these are really, really important things to consider. I think whilst everybody does have their own situation, your student life and how you kind of adapt and how you kind of change and what availability or what options are available to you are really, really important. So choose what's best for you. We are going to talk a tiny little bit about sort of costings, but this is just things to keep in the back of your mind. Not super important right now to think, what's my budget going to be, how much can I afford, because you've really got to pick where you want to go and what you want to study first before you start kind of really thinking about the nitty-gritties. But Becky, if you just swap to the next slide, that would be awesome. So how much is it going to cost? It is important to think about your budget when you are thinking of submitting applications. I think that's a good time to think about it, because costings can differ a lot. One of the kind of tips about sort of student life and choosing a student life, some universities will have really expansive libraries and potentially kind of schemes where they might give you a couple of course books for free. The only reason I mention course books is because course books come with a really heavy tag of they're going to cost you so much money because you're going to have to buy 10-15 different course books, and actually it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You go to the library, they'll often stock all the course books that you'll need. You can buy them secondhand if you need to, but there's still quite a few things that you might need to pay for. So when you're thinking about student life, just kind of thinking, what might I need to pay for as a student going to university? So I just popped on the side there some examples of the UK costs for certain things. So your rent, so that's things like your halls of residence, and that will include everything like internet and bills and electricity if you stay in halls of residence, and that can obviously vary, as you can see, and that's the cost per week. So depending on what you want, again, your student life, it's completely on you, but obviously lots of different types of accommodation, so en suites, shared facilities, catered. We've got it all. It's just picking what's appropriate for you. Transport as well, I just note that down. At Southampton, we have a scheme, so if you do decide to live in halls of residence, we provide you with a free bus pass to travel around the city to get to know your area in your first year. So, that then is a university that you wouldn't have to factor that in, but some universities you'll have to travel around, and that will be an unavoidable cost, which is absolutely fine because that university will be perfect for you overall. Nights out as well, that's something to consider. Some 10 to 40, it's completely personal. You might find that will be 0. You might find that will be a little bit more depending on your individual needs as a student. Bills, so things like phone bills and extra things like gym memberships and things like that. And I just put takeaway pizza because who doesn't love a takeaway pizza as a student? I'm sure Stephen and Becky can back me up. I definitely had my fair share of those when I was at university. My budget might have been a little bit more than that because yeah, it happens, but it's a really good idea to maybe outline the costs that you think you might encounter when you're a student at university, and then you'll be able to kind of budget appropriately, and you'll have a really good idea. And it might help you if you're completely baffled by choosing, because there's so much choice. You might actually find that these kinds of these kinds of things will be deal breakers, so they'll really help you decide where is going to be best for you and give you the best student life. What we're going to do now, so that's kind of the overview of student life. I'm going to continue myself and just give an introduction to personal statements and give a little bit of an overview for you, and then we'll hand back to Stephen and back to Becky, who can kind of finish off and give you those real top tips. So what is a personal statement? Obviously your personal statement is used as part of your application, but I just wanted to give a bit of an overview here to give you an idea of how many people actually apply for UK universities. To give you an idea of how many personal statements there are out there at the moment. So I've listed kind of a few universities here in terms of application levels and how many acceptances, and the acceptance rates, obviously you can see, is, you know, obviously less than the amount of applications that go in. But the figures on the left hand side really do show that for every one of those applications, there will have been a personal statement written, there will have been a personal statement read. And I think it's really important to remember at this point that you know, it is quite an important part of your application. So if we skip to the next slide, what this will show you is the different things that Ucas ask for, and this is what those selectors are seeing to make you an acceptance rather than just an applicant. So your Ucas form, when you do apply, you'll be looking at section number 1, so that will have things like your personal details, which courses you've chosen. Personal details are not something that we as universities make any decisions based on. We don't look at your email address, although we do suggest you have a professional email address when you do apply to university. We don't make any decisions, so yes or no's, based on any personal details, but that is just something that we need to know for contact and to be able to contact you. Section number 2 will be your qualifications, so what you've done to this point, what grades you have obtained, so potentially any exams you maybe sat last year or the year before, what you currently have, and also what you're predicted to get. So these will be used for consideration, absolutely, and we will look at these in relation to what we're asking for as our entry criteria. You'll then see section 3 as the personal statement, and then you'll see section 4 as the reference. So the personal statement is kind of its own thing, and it's really the only opportunity you're going to get potentially to speak to the admissions tutors and really persuade us. And I think persuade is a perfect word for the personal statement, because that's exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to persuade us that you want that place and that you deserve the place at the university. And the reference at the end, so that's actually written by your teachers and advisors. It can be different in different schools about who writes it. It might be your form tutor, it could be your head of SICT, it could be a variation of different staff members, but it will be written by a teacher, and it really does just enhance the personal statement and kind of really back that up. So it's a really nice application process. You know, we don't look at personal details for anything else other than contacting, and then we'll look at things like predicted grades, personal statements and references. So on the next slide, I get the question quite a lot of, do personal statements actually matter? And I think it's really important to note this. So they are absolutely vital for some courses. I would say, you know, in the UK particularly, things like teaching, so a primary teaching course, for example, where there are requirements that you have things like work experience. The only way that you're going to be able to put that, because as you noticed on the previous slide, there's no space for things like work experience, hours or anything like that in your Ucas application. Your personal statement is the way to convey how much work experience you've done. So it is absolutely vital for some. If it says 20 hours work experience on the application and you have to convey that, it's going to be done through the personal statement. It is important for others. So courses will look at them and really evaluate. Some will invite you to interview and discuss your personal statement. So obviously it's very important. It's also relevant at the margin for others. So I say at the margin because it can be the difference between you and another student gaining a place at university. You know, I've heard of a lot of kind of what do we call them, tie break situations where we have two identical profiled students with exactly the same predicted grades, exactly the same, you know, glowing reference, but the personal statement can just be that little thing that really tips you over the edge because it shows your interest. And I'll talk about, well, Stephen and Becky will talk about content and tips later, so I'm not going to touch on that at all, but it is important what I'm trying to get across to you. And it is always just one part though of the selection process. And the next slide will just show you the selection methods. So this is things that we will look at as universities, and you'll see the personal statement there, but we'll obviously look at things like LNAT, so law exams or any special exams that you need to sit. We'll look at those as well. So the next slide just describes to you really who is looking at these personal statements and who might be reading them. And I think it's important to bear this in mind when you do write your personal statements. It can be academic stuff, so it can be experts in your field. So if you're applying for, as Becky mentioned, clinical psychology based courses, it could be a clinical psychologist, academic staff who is reading your personal statement. So it's important to kind of remember that when you are thinking about the tone of your statement. Departmental administrators, so departmental people that might know a bit about clinical psychology, but they're not, you know, super experts in their field. Or it could be central administrators, so people like potentially Stephen, Becky or myself who don't know anything about the subject, who admissions have said, you know, could you have a look over this personal statement? Absolutely, could be any of those. So do remember that when you are thinking about what your kind of tone, it could be anyone who is making the decisions, and it can be based on own personal judgment. So it could be based on, I'm an academic member of staff, this student sounds really committed, great, I want them. Or it could be a checklist of criteria. Have they mentioned this? Have they got the work experience? Tick, tick, we'll invite them to interview. We want to speak to them further, or we will make them an offer. Just before I hand back to my colleagues, the last slide that I've got to kind of speak about is really the application process in terms of deadlines. So this year there is slight change. Their deadline has been extended to the end of January because of the situation. Ucas are a really good organisation, but they're also quite flexible around situations. So obviously this year it has been a bit of a topsy-turvy time, which means that they have identified that there is the need to maybe extend the deadline. But the deadline is usually around about the middle of January, the sort of 15th of January. That's when it is, 15th of January. If you are to study something like medicine, veterinary or dentistry, or you want to apply for the University of Cambridge or the University of Oxford, then you will be looking at an earlier deadline of the middle of October, 15th of October, 1510. That's what you're part of the 1510 club. That's what one school called it once, and it stuck with me. But it's really important to remember that if you are applying for one of those, you will have to do your application earlier, and that will be your personal statement, your reference, everything will need to go in at once. As Becky mentioned, you can apply for up to 5 different choices. So your personal statement needs to be reflective of that. You can apply for, although it's not recommended, you could apply for 5 completely separate courses. You could apply for 5 related courses, or you could apply for 5 exactly the same. When I say related, or when I say completely different, generally the subject matter might be the same, but you might find that different universities call courses by different names. So, you know, try not to kind of, you know, name drop that. I'm gonna, before I say too much on personal statements, I don't want to step on anyone else's toes. I'm just going to pass over, I think it's Stephen who I'm handing back to, who will talk you through the real stuff that you need to put in there. I think that's important.
Thanks so much, Steph. So there's some really wonderful advice there in terms of framing the personal statement and the role it plays in your application. As we've heard there already, it will be important for everyone, potentially in different ways for different universities and different courses, but it is important to get this right. So in this section, I'm going to look at how to approach it. You've seen an interview panel already in Steph's slide, and here's another one. So in terms of what universities are expecting, they are aware that you are, 17, that you are at a stage where you won't have had lots and lots of life experience. But they nevertheless, bearing that in mind, want to make certain that you've got the requisite abilities, capabilities and outlook to thrive on your course. So number one, for most departments, if not all, will be academic ability. That's the very first thing they'll be looking at. So in terms of being assured that you'll be able to cope, to succeed and fully benefit from the course. You will see typically that it says typical entry requirements, and for your A-levels it might be 3 A's or similar. Most of our universities will need those qualifications at the level stated, so 2 A's and 2 B's may not be enough, but with a good personal statement, you may find actually that universities will take a second look, and you could be one of those candidates that Steph's just outlined that is on that cutting off point, and you could just make the cut if you write a good personal statement. Don't underestimate how important this second one is. So interest in your subject should glow in your statement. Your statement should be infused with this enthusiasm for your discipline. You can't necessarily engineer it in, but if you're writing positively, using positive and active words, and Becky will talk a bit more about this in a moment, the person reading it will share your infectious enthusiasm and think, well, actually, yes, I want this person on my degree. Not only can they cope with the course, but they're going to be actively and positively engaged, and you're going to bring something to the wider cohort. Do also show that you understand the degree programme, and the reason we've got this interview panel is that your personal statement is like writing a job letter. It's like a job application, because you're trying to convince your future employer, in this case, you know, your university, it is a bit different, that actually that you're serious about what you're embarking on, that you've thought carefully, and you've heard in the first half of our talk how to go about researching the university of your choice. You know, share that with us. Tell us why this subject, you know, what sort of university you're looking for, and make certain that we can see that your face fits, and your profile fits with what we do as an institution. And then finally, transferable skills. As I said right at the outset, you know, we don't expect you to have loads and loads of work experience. But if you have done a volunteering placement, if you've had a part-time job, a little bit like Steph said with primary teaching, these sorts of things can put you head and shoulders above the competition and make your application stand out. Moving on to the next slide, the key piece of advice, and you will see this on the Ucas pages that give more in-depth guidance if you are looking for that going forward. Big thing to remember, don't leave it until the last minute. So it's 4,000 characters. It's tiny in terms of text. You'll be writing lots more you know, lengthy and more in-depth stuff with your essays and your assignments during your A-levels. But this is one you've got to get right, and it's its brevity in a way which is the challenge. You're having to edit out the extraneous, the peripheral, and to really focus in on the convincing points that show us that you are the right person for our degree. You know, when I say us, there's 5 different universities you'll be applying to with one statement, so it is a challenge. You're trying to position yourself as the right candidate for 5 different courses at 5 different universities. So don't leave it until the last minute. Keep redrafting, and again, Becky will come onto this in a moment, so that when you click submit, you have written one of the most persuasive pieces of writing that you've achieved so far that could determine your future admission to UK universities. Moving on to our next slide, you know, there's no single formula, worth noting that. And that goes for the structure as well. So in terms of how you present this, one piece of advice here would be to put the most essential and admissions focused content at the start of your statement. If you imagine, and you put yourself in the shoes of your admissions staff, who will be reading your application along with hundreds of others, you've also seen from Steph's slide, you know, thousands of others, they're going to want to see that you're worth reading on with. You know, they will read your statement, but that if you can convince them early on to pay attention to absolutely everything you're saying and to read it forensically in detail, you know, it's going to help. So a strong opening is useful. Try and avoid cliches. We'll come on to that again in a moment. Of course, with your personal statement, you're having to be editorial anyway, and just keep in the essential and the most important points, but where you can, put those at the start. And do end on a positive note. You know, keep the tone, keep the language upbeat, And that will answer what you're seeing on the left-hand side about seeing that genuine commitment and that genuine enthusiasm that may be hidden, but is nevertheless evident because of the language and the sorts of words that you've been using. Can I go forward another slide, please, Becky? In terms of weighting, I've said already there's no one way of doing this. This is not going to be exact, so you don't have to count your words 80% to 20%. But as a rule of thumb, focus on the subject and tell us why it is that you are applying to accounting and finance, if that's true of all of your choices. You've heard already, that you may, Steph's already said you might be applying for a range of different courses, which you can do. For example, if you're someone who's interested in behavioural economics, but you're also interested in business, you could have some overlap there between psychology, economics and business. Same with politics and history, economics, sociology, some of these adjacent subjects. So be strategic, but think about it and choose carefully. If you're talking about subjects, choose examples that are relevant to all your university choices. Next slide, please. These are some examples. So in terms of how you go about this, I've just given you two contrasting subject examples. In economics, you wouldn't have to choose any of these, but you could, for example, look at microeconomics or the example I've just given you of behavioural economics. You could then, if you're looking at the last of those, think about things like nudge theory, about consumer behaviour, and perhaps how that psychological dimension of choice comes into behavioural economics. And then right at the end, never forget that this isn't just an arbitrary, dry piece of text about, why a subject is great. It's all about positioning you in the mix and telling us why you are the right person to then study this subject. So never forget to link it back to yourself and show us at every turn with evidence, back up every claim you make with some concrete evidence that shows us that you have what it takes. For English, it could be the same thing. I won't go through this in detail, but be specific, be personal. If you love Shakespeare or if you love 20th century theatre, tell us that. Tell us what's really influenced your interest in that subject. Tell us about your engagement with it. And you're already showing us that commitment, that enthusiasm and that suitability. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is the last slide I have for you, a recap before Becky gives you some concrete ABC advice on how to go about this. Don't worry, because there is no right way, so don't please take what we're saying too literally. If you're looking at examples online, use those as perhaps a guide, but this has got to be written by you with your subject and your choices in mind. Don't try and say everything, and this is the hard thing. It's not about saying enough. When you first look at the screen, you may think, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm not sure how I'm going to fill the page. By your last draft, I can promise you it's going to be much more about taking things out, and being selective. Now, Becky is going to give you some hopefully very useful guidance now on how exactly you do that.
Great, thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you, Steph, as well, for giving us an oversight of the personal statement. So you guys might be sitting there now thinking, okay, so I know what a personal statement is, I know how it fits into my Ucas application, but how do I begin? How do I even start this whole process? So hopefully the next couple of slides, which will take us up to the Q&A, will give you some guidance and some top tips to help to be able to achieve that. So make it relevant, not just a list. Okay, so the first thing I recommend that you do is get a piece of paper or get a Word document up on your computer, or if you work better on your phones like many students do these days, start a list of everything that you think you might want to put into your personal statement. So, you might want to talk about the current subjects that you're studying now at school. You might want to tell us a little bit about that work experience that you did, or that volunteering, or your current job, or that extra project that you've done. Make a list of everything you might want to put into your personal statement. Once you've done this and you've exhausted your brain of everything that's in there, then pick your absolute favourite points. So if you're applying, for example, to do law and you have had some work experience being able to work in a law firm, then that is a very, very relevant point that I would say is something that you probably should be putting into your personal statement. So pick your favourite points and put it through the ABC method. Now, A, A stands for action. So what is it that you've done? So first of all, you need to tell us, you know, if you've done a particular sort of work experience, if you've done an extra project. So for the example for this, we have, I spent 2 weeks doing an internship at GlaxoSmithKline in the summer. So if you wrote this on your personal statement, the admissions tutor would look at this and think, well, that's great, but what did you get from it? You know, you can't just leave it at this. You do need to expand upon this point. So that's where benefit comes into play. So B stands for benefit. So how has this helped you? So from this, I developed a deeper understanding of the drug development process from conception to production. So this student has now told us what they have done and also what they've gained from it. You know, this student could have worked at GlaxoSmithKline, but has sat on reception making cups of tea for people. But they've now told us what they've actually got from this process, you know, and it is very, very subject specific. Now, this student hasn't actually mentioned what specific subject they want to study, but I guess from looking at this and looking at the picture as well, we can see that it's definitely going to be in some sort of biochemistry or biological sciences. So this student has told this, but as Stephen mentioned, you must always bring it back round to yourself and why you want to study the specific subject. Now, for those of you already thinking ahead, you might think that C stands for conclusion, and in a way it does, but what it actually stands for is course relevant. You must make your statement that you're saying relevant to the reason why you're writing the personal statement. You're writing the personal statement to convince the university that you are a fantastic student for that specific course. So you've told us an action that you've done. You've told us how it's benefited you, but then you must tell us why you did this. Why did you undertake this action for your higher education experience? So having an understanding of how drugs are developed will be a useful foundation for the pharmacology modules within the biochemistry degree. So this student has rounded this up really nicely to say, you know, why they undertook this work experience. And also in this statement, we can see that the student really understands the program that they are applying for, because they say that they are interested in pharmacology modules. Now, hopefully, if this student had done their research earlier on, which we're going to assume that they did, they would have applied for degree programs that had modules within pharmacology. So when the admissions tutor read this, they can see, oh, okay, so they understand the course, they understand that our course has lots of modules on pharmacology. Okay, I can see that they've done this extracurricular work, they're really committed to the subject, big tick. Okay, so when you are writing your personal statement, you must make sure that you're bringing it back round to the being course relevant and telling us why you want to study a specific course. So A, B, C, action, benefit, course relevance. Now, for some of you, this might not work. For some of you, you might be one of those lucky people who can sit down and just write and it all comes out sounding absolutely perfect. I can guarantee there's probably less than 1% of you who can actually do that straight off the back without having to do lots of redrafts. But you may find that the ABC method really does work for you. So I highly recommend everybody give it a go. Pick an easy topic, pick something that you know that is really, really good for your application and put it through the ABC method. And when you're doing that, you must always remember to use positive language. You've got to think about those poor admissions tutors. Now, as Steph's slide showed, there are thousands and thousands of applications to Ucas every year from students, and that equals thousands and thousands of personal statements. And our admissions team here at our universities and our academic teams will be reading those. And, you know, there's a rumour that goes around every year, a myth that goes around every year that universities don't read personal statements, but we do, because we have to, because we get more applications than we've got spaces, and we do need to read them to be able to choose which students we want to give places to. So if you're writing your personal statement and it's filled with negative language and things that, you know, oh, I really like this subject, but I really don't like this part about it, rethink what you're writing. It has to be positive. So think about the language that you're using. You may also find as well that you repeat certain words, and there is a word that gets repeated a lot within personal statements, and that word is passionate. If you speak to a admissions tutor around the 15th of January, around now, actually, around that Ucas deadline, and you mention the word passionate to them, they're probably going to roll their eyes or groan very loudly, because this is a word that lots of students use, and you may find it is your buzzword too. And if you write your first draft of your personal statement, you may find that there's your own specific buzzword that you use that you've repeated 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So I would recommend looking at those specific words that you're using and maybe swap them. Get a thesaurus out. Make sure you understand the words that you are swapping, but make sure they're positive. So instead of being passionate about a subject, you could be enthusiastic about a subject. Instead of working within a team, you could have collaborated with your peers. So thinking about other ways of describing the positive feelings you have for a specific course. If you can get pioneered in there, congratulations. So do's for students, so use the right language. It is a formal piece of writing. If you think biology is awesome, that's great, but don't write biology is awesome. Think of a more formal way of writing just how awesome you think your specific subject area is. As Stephen mentioned, draft. This is really important. We do recommend 6 to 8 drafts of the personal statement, and you may find certain sections of your personal statement you might draft more than others, and that's absolutely fine. Stephen did also mention about a punchy opening for your personal statement. Lots of students make the mistake of trying to write the most wonderful opening statement they can within their document. You can always write your opening line last. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. My top tip is just get writing. It's okay if you start your personal statement halfway down in the middle and then come back to your opening paragraph much later on. Just start it, because that can be the thing that can really stall students for making any progress on their personal statement there. Making it relevant as well. So if you're applying for, say, a science-based program, but you did an English literature online course and you loved it, but you're still applying for a science program, don't tell us about the English literature online course, because it's not relevant to the specific subject you want to study. If you're telling us about a maths program you've done, a work experience you've done that was based around teaching, and you did an extra project on law, if you include all of those things, it could make your personal statement what we call wishy-washy and really unfocused, and that's not a good personal statement. So it does need to be relevant to the specific subject you want to study, and you can only do this by being sure of your choice. And all of that research that we talked about, if you can remember back to the beginning of this presentation, all of that research will feed into the quality of your personal statement. So that research is so important to do now, and we're delighted to be able to start you on that journey today. So don'ts for students. Don't plagiarise. So this is, do not copy somebody else's work. Ucas have very sophisticated plagiarism filters, and they will be able to tell if you have copied somebody else's work. It is really almost impossible to accidentally plagiarise. So if you haven't plagiarised, do not panic that it might somehow show up that you have. Just don't do it. Don't copy anybody else's. And that's personal statements you find on the internet, and also personal statements that may have been your older brothers or sisters 4 years before you. You don't need to overshare, so keep it subject specific. If you if you went on a gap year and you had a fantastic time, you don't need to tell us about that in your personal statement. The only way you would need to tell us about that is if, say, you were applying for something like, I don't know, environmental science, and you went to Costa Rica and you worked in some conservation projects. Then that's relevant, but you don't need to overshare telling us your cat's name and all that sort of stuff. Do not rush your personal statement. Hopefully this presentation has kind of shown that there's a lot of work to do for this. And also don't forget to spell check as well. If you're applying for, again, environmental science and you're consistently spelling pollution with one L, then that will, that's the only thing that the admissions tutors will see. Now I'm just going to go through a couple of statements here, and I realise if we were in a room with you, we would have you say true and false, would have you put your hands up, but unfortunately we don't have that luxury today as we're doing this online. So we're just going to go through it, and I just want you on your own now, where you are, just to think if you think this is true or false. So a personal statement is a waste of time. No one actually reads them. So do you think that's a true or false statement? And it is a false statement. So hopefully if you were thinking false, congratulations. So the personal statement can make a direct difference to whether you'll get an offer or not. So it's really important that you do spend time on this and really put in the energy and effort into making it the best it can be. A personal statement can make a direct difference to whether a student gets an offer or not. True. I hope you guys had got that one. Obviously, it's the same statement but flipped on its head there. So poor personal statements are more likely to result in rejection. So that is a personal statement that has been rushed, is not spell checked properly, is not relevant, is really wishy-washy, talking about many different subjects, and hasn't had some love and care and attention put into it. True or false? Students can use personal statements they source on the internet. I've just mentioned this. False. This is a big false, capital red letters, false. Do not plagiarize. There is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of, apparently star personal statements out there on the internet. But as I said, Ucas have very sophisticated plagiarism filters. True or false? Students should write approximately 7 or 8 drafts before settling on the final version. True. Practice does make perfect. You may find, as I said, some sections you write more drafts for and some you don't. But if you get to draft 27, then maybe take a breather, ask somebody else to read it. Another top tip, read your personal statement out loud, because that will help you spot any mistakes you may have made that your eye is just not picking up on because you're so involved with that personal statement. So read it out loud. Pick 1 or 2 really trusted contacts to read your personal statement, maybe a parent and a teacher, or a parent and your best friend. I wouldn't recommend asking 7, 8, 9, 10 people to read your personal statement, because they will all have an opinion. And if you're having 10 different opinions being sort of, shot at you, then that can become very confusing and make the whole process even more overwhelming than it needs to be. So maybe pick 1 or 2 trusted people in your life to read your personal statement and to give you some feedback. True or false? Students can save space by not using paragraphs. Now, this is actually true. Yes, of course, you can save space by not using paragraphs and all of that sort of stuff, but don't. So do set your personal statement out to be professional, and also the spelling mistakes as well. So make sure that you are, treating it like a professional piece of text. But just to give you a bit more information, Stephen found this out yesterday, so we quickly copied it and pasted it in here, and we can share this with your teacher, who can hopefully then share it with you afterwards. But there is a fantastic video on ucas.com which goes over writing the personal statement, and you may find it really useful for your journey once you have started your Ucas application. So I hope that's useful, but we will send this link over so you can have a look in more detail. But we're now going to move on to the Q&A. So I am just going to stop sharing my screen here and invite my colleagues to join in with the Q&A. And I do hope that was useful, everybody. And yes, please ask any questions you may have.
If there aren't any questions to necessarily start with, just on the back of Becky's kind of do's and don'ts, I think there's a couple from me of like just little tidbits of information that I've picked up throughout my years in HE at the moment. Is just one of the things, be really open with criticism, open to criticism of your drafts. If you do give it to a member of staff or your teacher to look at, and this was very personal to me. My first draft came back with red lines, no, don't put that in, and I took that really quite personally. But then actually my final draft was nothing like my first draft, and it was a lot better. So try and be open to criticism. Quotes and jokes, I will just make a tiny reference to quotes and jokes. Quotes, as much as you think you can find an individual quote that's going to make it sound absolutely brilliant, A, I can guarantee that somebody else will have picked that quote also, and B, we're not that interested really in hearing about what somebody else has to say about something that's not relevant. This is about you, your journey. We'd much rather you use your words than kind of paraphrase from somebody else's. And jokes, I read a personal statement once which said the opening line was, knock knock, who's there? Your future student, which I thought was quite intuitive and quite funny. But again, you don't know who's going to be reading your personal statement, so remain professional. If you are the kind of jokey person, that's fantastic. You'll get to nurture that once you're a student, but really bear that in mind. And just on the back of the word passion, there is an opening line which is the most overused opening line and statement in personal statement history, which is from a young age, or I've always wanted to be, or from the day I was born I wanted to be a, and I think that notion of from a young age is often incorrect and often false, because we weren't born wanting to be an archaeologist, but you've developed that over time, and it doesn't make you less worthy of a student that you may have only decided what you wanted to do in the last 2 years versus somebody that's always wanted to do it. I think it's kind of a pointless notion. So I would avoid that, and it's really overused, so try and keep it. And just my final thing, keep a copy of it, because your personal statement, it's not a natural thing talking about yourself and talking about your strengths. And, you know, although you might find future jobs not being in the field exactly, it will give you a really good basis of reference to then, you know, oh yeah, that's how I talked about myself a couple of years ago, so that's how, you know, I can frame a job application now. So they're just some tips from me whilst we're waiting for some questions to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. That's really useful to know. And yeah, the with the drafts as well, another top tip, sorry, I didn't mention this one, but another top tip is don't delete anything you write. So if you start your personal statement, save it as personal statement draft 1. When you're ready to redraft it, copy and paste it into a new Word document, call that personal statement draft 2, and then reword what you're writing. Just because you might get to draft 5, you might get, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks down the line and realize that actually that paragraph that you wrote for draft 1 is now absolutely perfect later on down the line, but actually you got rid of it because you overwrote it, you know, during draft 2 or draft 3. So don't delete anything that you write, keep it all, and then use it to kind of merge your personal statement into the final product once you have finished. And quotes, cheesy and cliche. I think if it was the quote that made you want to study that subject, which I highly doubt, then fine. But yeah, it's somebody else's words, and you have 4,000 characters, which essentially is a page of A4. To put it into perspective like that, 4,000 quotes is a page of A4. So as Stephen said, you will be cutting out a lot of stuff. Yeah. There doesn't seem to be any questions, guys. But we're here. Oh, we have a hand up.
Yeah, so when you were talking about how you can apply to 5 different universities with one personal statement, how would you keep that personal statement relevant for those 5 different universities?
Don't name drop. That's what I'm going to say. First of all, the amount of personal statements that accidentally have. I really love the University of Edinburgh because of this, and I'm sat here at the University of Southampton thinking, oh well, that's fantastic, because we can't, you know, we don't know where you've applied necessarily. We won't really look at that. The idea is keep your personal statement to subject specific. So although you're applying to 5 different universities, it's the subject that is the most important thing, not the university. So Becky, Stephen, I don't know if you've got anything else to add on that, but don't name drop. Please don't name drop.
Yeah, it's highly likely, with most, you will find this with most students, I say highly likely that you'll be applying for subjects within the similar field. So you might be applying for economics at one university, economics and business at another, economics with French at another, and you know, there'll be a string of kind of commonality between the different courses that you're applying for. So focus on that commonality. I have had a student say to me before, I want to study veterinary medicine or graphic design, and I'm like, I don't know what the commonality is there, pick one. But you know, it's quite rare for that to happen. Most students will have a subject specific area, even if it is very umbrella term, it's very kind of loosely, that will be something. So focus on the subject. But Stephen, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that.
I saw another question's come in. I don't know if we want to get Sasha's question, but
Sasha?
So I'm thinking, when I'm thinking about what courses I want to study, and I have 2 different options, but they're very different. Is there that possibility, if you haven't decided when you want to apply to university yet, of drafting 2 different personal statements for each university, if you haven't decided on what course you want to do yet?
And this sort of links to the last question. I did wonder whether it might. So there's, in terms of how you frame your personal statement, for 1 or 2 of our degrees, we actually offer a second personal statement because they're quite niche, relatively speaking, and that many universities don't offer it. So it's worth just checking whether that's the case. If you're applying for liberal arts or for global sustainable development, for example, for us, that would be a second personal statement where you could have more space to elaborate. Going back to the previous question, and hopefully linking to yours as well, Sasha, it would then just be a case, I guess, of looking for that root commonality. Ideally, your application should have a common root, and it might just be a case of thinking big. You know, are you thinking about global sustainability? Are you thinking about, I don't know, corporate governance? You might find some of these big, meaty subject areas connect your 2. It could be law, it could be business, for example. and actually provide a unifying factor that allow you in your personal statement to be persuasive, but nevertheless, right to your interests for two different subject areas. If you were applying for classics and physics, for example, that's going to be more challenging. So there is a limit to how far you can maybe go with that. But
yeah, I recommend maybe if you have that, if you are a vet med graphics design student, I'm going to always use that example, but maybe before, because you're in year 12 now, so obviously before you have time on this, if this will be this time next year for you guys, but maybe contact universities now. So do that research now, and if you say there's 4 courses that have that common theme and then you have one kind of out there course that's slightly different, contact that university that has that out there course and see if they will accept a personal statement outside of the Ucas application. And if they come back to you and say, yeah, we're happy to do that, then fantastic. There you go.
I think we have a couple of other questions if we've got time. Feel free to speak out if you have a question. We'll get that answered.
Hi. So if I'm doing an EPQ that has nothing to do with the career that I potentially want to work in when I'm older, is there a point of me doing the EPQ? Will universities not really care about it, or?
I'm gonna just quickly nip that in the bud. We love EPQs. I think EPQs are wonderful. They are less so about the subject that you're actually doing your EPQ in. They are more about the transferable skills. The fact that you are picking a research topic, you are researching it, you are going out of your way to do something in addition to your A-level study. I think that EPQs are fantastic, and often some universities, I know Southampton we do, but we make alternative offers. So we actually say, if you are to achieve an A in your EPQ, although the normal entry requirement is say AAB, if you get an A in your EPQ, we will drop that to ABB. So an EPQ all round, doesn't matter about the subject, putting that in your personal statement. It's about the research skills, the extra reading, the extra work that you're taking on. Those skills have often been proved as well to really assist you whilst you're at university, because you already have that independent study. And I think I love EPQs. I'm a huge EPQ fan, so you're doing a really good thing by doing it. That's not to say if you haven't done one, your application is going to be worse. It's one of those things, if you have chosen to do it, I would say that's great. We will look at that and we will go, yeah, great.
Yeah, I just want to flag EPQs are seen differently at different universities, so do just bear that in mind. Obviously, you're applying to, if you would decide to, because it's applying to up to 5 courses, so do make sure that you are aware of how different universities will view it. We're very similar to Southampton. We love an EPQ. If your EPQ, say your EPQ is on Chinese history and you're applying for economics, and they're not related, then you might decide not to put it into your personal statement. Obviously, that's a very kind of personal thing. You might decide not to put it in there, but you would still put it on your qualifications that you achieved. And again, at Surrey, if you get an A in your EPQ, we then might, and it's not always confirmed, but we then might be able to drop your offer down an A-level grade to one grade level grade lower, because you've got that A in the EPQ. I'm not sure how it is at Warwick, how it is different.
Yeah, so it's the same, and I think the key point here is being selective. If your EPQ is a great piece of evidence for what you're trying to say, include it. If it's not, leave it out. We do love an EPQ as well. No surprises. It's wonderful sort of demonstration of sort of research experience, but it's not essential. So, choose your strongest points, really.
I think we have Gabriella. Can we have one last question?
Yeah, hi. So I had one question. It's so here in Gibraltar, the Gibraltarians or residents or Gibraltar residents get a grant to study at in UK, but there's some Spanish students and we don't get a grant. So it's very unlikely I study in UK because of that reason, because of the tuition fees, especially with Brexit going on. So I was wondering, is there like a website just like Ucas for European universities, or do you know anything about that?
I don't know, Stephen, do you know how, if you were to apply, say, to the Netherlands, or how they go about that? I don't know if it's direct applications to those universities or if they have something similar to Ucas in place.
So was the question about coming to the UK as a Spanish resident in Gibraltar?
No, it was just about is there something equivalent of Ucas but in Europe kind of thing?
Yes, sorry, I see. Yes, I understand. It varies by country. So some some systems are like UCAS, some are quite different. That's just one way you'd probably want to, speak to advisors within your school, or it's a little bit varied, I would say. It's not quite so straightforward. UCAS just covers the UK for undergraduate and some postgraduate courses, but it'll be a different system in different countries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, that was incredibly useful. I wrote down the ABC method. I think that's very useful. I hadn't heard that before. And the read aloud is something that I say to my students all the time, even with coursework. Read it aloud. And many of the things you've said today have been so helpful. I don't want the lower six to feel that I'm expecting them to write their personal statements now. This is just the start of your journey, and you will get a lot more help from me. You will get seminars sort of training you, going over things that have been said today. And a reminder, of course, that your predicted grades will really matter. So that, alongside a great personal statement, will lead hopefully to university offers. All our current upper six have now got university offers. 3 of them have 5 out of 5 offers. So I just want the lower six to know that this is going to be a positive experience for you, and we're very excited to support you on your journey. Thanks again to our providers today. It was really fantastic to hear from you all, real people at real universities, not just Mrs. Mason blathering on about universities. So thanks again, everyone, and hope that we will see you again, Steph, Stephen and Becky. That would be fantastic. Thank you again. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Oh, brilliant.
I don't know if this is still recording, by the way, just so you know. I don't know.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, so
Should we chat on Teams?
We'll chat on Teams rather than debriefing here, but yeah, lovely to see you. See you soon. Yeah.
See you later, guys.